All right, we talked to Pablo Torre from SI.com. He spoke with Jeremy Lin, and Jeremy Lin said, look, I would have preferred to stay with the Knicks, but the Knicks never made him an offer. And then I was reading with Frank Isola of the New York Daily News. He's the Knicks beat writer, and it seems like that James Dolan was bothered by the lack of loyalty here with Jeremy Lin. So let's bring in Frank and ask him about this. I'm trying to figure out what exactly is going on with this story, Frank, that it seems like it still has legs, that Lin says he would have preferred staying in New York, but he tells the writer from Sports Illustrated they didn't make me an offer. So separate fact from fiction for me.
Well, I'm sure the people of Houston are happy to know that they gave him $25 million and he would rather be in New York. That being said, the Knicks, in a lot of these cases with restricted free agents, they're kind of told to go out there and get a deal, and that's exactly what Jeremy Lin did. Remember that first deal, now he hadn't officially signed it, but it looked like in the third year he was going to make $9.8 million. The Knicks came out there, of course, we're going to match it. Mike Woodson said we're going to match the offer. Then he went back, and he got that third year pushed up to $14.9 million, which, depending on who you talk to, could cost the Knicks $30 to $35 million in that third year. And I think Jim Dolan at that point looked at it that, he felt somewhat deceived, and he felt that maybe Jeremy Lin wasn't being very loyal to a Knicks organization that gave him a chance, because they think about it as, well, you were on Golden State a couple of years ago, you basically never played. You then got cut by Golden State. You went to training camp with Houston, got cut by them. We picked you up. This is where you made yourself, was in New York, and after, you negotiated a deal with Houston, you went back for more money.
From a basketball perspective, and that's on the floor, was this the right move for the Knicks to let him walk?
I think for the money, it's two different arguments, because the money never matters for the Knicks. I mean, they gave Eddie Curry $50 million, Jerome James $30 million. So for an average team, he's certainly not worth the money. But for the Knicks, when you think about it, Raymond Felton, you look at the numbers that Raymond Felton had when Mike D'Antoni was the coach of the Knicks, it was the same, if not better, than what Jeremy Lin had. The bottom line is Raymond Felton wasn't an undrafted point guard from Harvard, so there wasn't this idea, this great story of the guy living on his brother's couch and things like that. So I think people fell in love with the story, and you absolutely should, because it's an unbelievable story. But sometimes I think that's clouding people's judgment, and I think Jim Dolan based it on emotion. There's no doubt about it. And then his basketball people told him, Glenn Gromwald, Mike Woodson, if we get Raymond Felton, we're getting a player that's just as good, if not better. But I don't think that's sitting well with the Knicks fan base that really fell in love with, that player, and they kind of like that team. And I think a lot of this now is going to fall on Carmelo Anthony, because they feel that Carmelo Anthony ran Mike D'Antoni out of town, and they feel that we know that Carmelo Anthony is Jim Dolan's guy. Jim Dolan made the trade, and that Jim Dolan's basically, once again, kind of picking Carmelo Anthony over Jeremy Lin.
I got that feeling, though, Frank. I think that this is something Carmelo, comes out and criticizes the contract, says it's ridiculous. And I said, did he do that with Landry Fields' contract with Toronto? I don't think he said it to anybody else, but he says it about Jeremy Lin. I think he was bothered by sharing the spotlight. It's his team, his town, and Jeremy Lin came in and, who is this guy to be able to do that? And Mike D'Antoni, hey, you're going to have me play a different way? That's not going to happen. So I got the feeling that he didn't want Lin to come back, that Carmelo didn't.
I think there was a little petty jealousy there, and I think it goes back to when Carmelo was out of the lineup with the groin injury. That's when Jeremy Lin really took off, and then it was, how will Carmelo Anthony fit in with Jeremy Lin? And I think Carmelo Anthony was definitely insulted by that. But for Carmelo, and Carmelo's been great to deal with, and he's been, he needs to be a better defender, obviously, but he's kind of handled himself for the most part pretty well. But he's a little out of line to call the contract ridiculous. I mean, everyone in the NBA probably has a ridiculous contract, and according to reports, I think even Dan Patrick probably has a ridiculous contract. But that's Jeremy Lin's right.
It's ridiculously low, Frank. You're right. But maybe, is he going to criticize Amari Stoudemire's contract?
Absolutely, and that's the thing. They all have crazy contracts. The only one who doesn't have a crazy contract is J.R. Smith, because he wanted to come back, so he signed for 2.8. And then J.R. Smith came out and said, "Well, if Jeremy Lin comes back, there could be some chemistry issues in the locker room because of the money that he's making." So clearly, there are some issues. There would have been some issues in that locker room had Jeremy Lin come back.
I still look at Jeremy Lin, and I'm not quite sure what he is. I'm not sure how good he is. And I think that Raymond Felton was sort of a safe landing, soft landing for this team if you had to go. Since they missed out on Nash, that you had Felton, okay, he's serviceable in there. Jeremy Lin still provides bigger dividends, a bigger picture, makes it must-see TV. Raymond Felton's never going to do that. And I think I had to factor that in as well. But what if you did this, Frank? What if you said Jeremy Lin is 8, 8, and 8? Let's say we just average this out. Is he an $8 million a year point guard for the next 3 years if you're the Knicks? If you're not including that third year, that's going to be $15 million, but just at $8 million a year.
I'm not so sure that he is, and you mentioned the name Steve Nash. So if the Knicks really felt that Jeremy Lin was their guy for the immediate future, why was their first priority in free agency to reach out to Steve Nash, who everyone knows, if he comes to the Knicks, is playing between 33 and 38 minutes a night, maybe even 40 minutes a night? So if Steve Nash was coming to the Knicks, he was going to be the starting point guard. They went out and got Jason Kidd, and Mike Woodson made it clear, oh no, Jeremy will still be starting. But let's face it, in the fourth quarter of a close game, Jason Kidd would have been the point guard of choice. So I think the Knicks kind of told you a little bit that, yeah, they wanted to bring him back on some level, but they weren't exactly convinced, kind of like what you're saying, of what kind of player he is just yet. If they were convinced that he is the real deal, they would not have gone after Steve.
You're right. Absolutely. I don't think they wanted him back, and I think James Dolan cannot feel like Jeremy Lin deceived him. I think that this was Lin got what he wanted. He got a team interested, and the Knicks moved on. They moved on with Raymond Felton, and I think it actually works out for both. Because Lin was never going to be able to recreate Lin's sanity, and I think he was going to. I think he might have gotten exposed a little bit, or he may have taken the sword on with this team if they didn't fare well. So, he's going to go to Houston. He may disappear there, but they got the guy they wanted, and they got a face for that franchise.
Yeah, and he's got, like we said, he's got a little ground to make up in Houston, because when they're giving you $25 million, you're telling the ticket buyers of Houston you would have preferred New York. And we know that a lot of people outside of New York have a bit of an inferiority complex. That's not the best way to go to a new city.
No, it's not. Hey, Frank, great job. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Dan, thanks a lot.
All right, Frank Isola, New York Daily News.